us right now, and we are certainly going to try as best as we can to give you some news, information, commentary maybe you hear nowhere else. So thank you for joining us today. Lathan Watts is with us, and he is the Director of Public Affairs at First Liberty. We'll talk about some of those religious liberty cases in just a minute. And then, of course, we have Dr. Merrill Matthews, who is the resident scholar for the Institute for Public Policy Innovation, and that is ipi.edu and org. So you got all sorts of ones, and find those ways, and we will certainly talk about some of the websites in just a minute. But I thought maybe first, let's get back to a Supreme Court ruling. It's not really a decision because it's really an injunction, but help us understand what came down out of certainly the state of New York, Lathan, because there was a lot of controversy about whether or not the Supreme Court should have even stepped in. But I know that you, at First Liberty, filed a friend of the court brief. So give us the background.
So there were actually a couple of different cases, I think, that they combined under that case with it was Diocese of Brooklyn, New York versus Cuomo is the site, if you want to read the opinion. And basically it was, the Catholic diocese there in Brooklyn, New York, and I believe it was Agudath Israel, which is also in New York, who were challenging Governor Cuomo's latest dictatorial impulse, where he decided to say you can't go to church, but you can still do all of these other things, and impose different restrictions on churches than he was imposing on other organizations. And so they asked for emergency relief from the Supreme Court. And so that's a little bit different than a typical Supreme Court case.
Right, where you have oral arguments and writing and all those kinds of things.
Because basically what you're asking is not really even to get to the merits of the First Amendment issue yet. You're just saying, look, this is an emergency. He just imposed this, and we have religious holidays coming up, and we need you to act right now.
Right.
And it's kind of the equivalent of, like, we may talk about it later, like we went to the district court in Kentucky because the governor shut down schools there, and we said we need an injunction to stay this order. And so it's going to the Supreme Court basically for that type of relief. Like, we need an emergency ruling right now. Yeah. And this is similar to what has happened before when you had, before Justice Barrett was sworn in, when you had an 8-member court.
4-4.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Roberts went with the 3 liberals, and so it split 4-4, which left the lower court ruling in place. That's what happens when you have a tie at the Supreme Court. But now you have Justice Barrett there, so it ended up 5-4. And Roberts with the liberals, I think, just trying to be consistent with what he's done so far, saying, well, we should defer to the scientists, and the governor's deferring to the scientists, and who are we to step in and question, blah, blah, blah. But the other 5 were like, you don't have to defer to the scientists when they violate the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. So they basically told Cuomo, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And so we did file a friend of the court brief in that case, and we were happy to get to see the decision come down the way it was now, with the full 9 members and Justice Barrett being one of them.
Very good. And again, we've posted this article from First Liberty, which not only talks about that, but some of the reaction about just the whole issue of religious liberty from Samuel Alito, Justice Alito. But I was just thinking for just a minute, Dr. Merrill Matthews, one of the arguments that is sort of being used right now by the Chief Justice is going all the way back almost a century, and it's in what's called the South Bay case, is justices really should just defer to local officials. And there's a lot of questions about that, not the least of which is, as you've been following some of this, the local officials disagree with one another, don't they?
They do. And then why would we need a Supreme Court if their role is just to agree, defer to the justices? I mean,
exactly.
To the local officials. Yes, you mentioned Chief Justice John Roberts trying to be consistent with his inconsistencies. And people keep trying to say we've got a 6-3 conservative court, and I keep thinking it's more like 5-4.
Hard to depend on that man, isn't it?
It is hard to depend on that, and it mystifies me why he thinks, because, and Lathan, you may have a better sense of this. It mystifies me why he feels like he has to go so out of the way, so far afield, to try to agree with the left. And this happened with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, where he signed joined on with the left and kept it being legal, but he had to use a completely different thinking to try to come up with that, saying, well, the mandate is a tax and the Congress can tax and so forth. It's bizarre. But this is why they're there, to find out and question whether or not things are actually constitutional, and you don't defer to local officials if they're doing something that's unconstitutional.
Yeah, I don't want to try to psychoanalyze Chief Justice Roberts, but I do think that
lots of luck trying to do that.
Exactly,
yeah.
Right. So I do think, though, based on some of his comments, even in his confirmation hearing and since then, there is sort of for conservative jurists the tendency not to want to make big sweeping decisions, or things that would be interpreted as a policy decision from the Supreme Court. And so where I think he goes astray is in trying to adhere to that, but when there is clearly a violation of the Constitution, if that results in the ending of a very popular policy, well, so be it. That's your job as the Supreme Court, is to say what is constitutional and what isn't. So I think, like you mentioned the Obamacare decision, there were all sorts of op-eds leading up to that oral argument and leading up to that decision in Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post and all these things, saying how this is what the people wanted and this is the will of the people and the Supreme Court shouldn't undo that, blah, 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 blah. That was all aimed at Roberts, every bit of it. That all of that was trying to influence him to go along with the four. And he did, because I think maybe he, again, was trying to not make a big policy decision from the Supreme Court, but declaring something that's been implemented is unconstitutional and therefore should be tossed out. That's not a policy decision. All that is saying is, look, if you want this policy, then do it right. Yeah. Do it in a way that comports with the Constitution. If it's a bad law, you don't get to just have bad laws just because it was popular. If the will of the people is contradictory to the Constitution, then what you do is either amend the Constitution if it's that important, or you go back and you write the law in a way that meets the policy objectives that the people say they want, but is also in keeping with the Constitution. I think that's my amateur analysis of how Roberts ends up tying himself in knots a lot of times trying to do this, because that Obamacare opinion was an absolute train wreck.
Yes. One of the things that I have noticed is, with the exception of one ruling by Neil Gorsuch, on almost every other case, he's been saying, if you made a mistake, you go fix it. We're not here to fix it. And you're starting to see that. And also some really pointed comments by Justice Neil Gorsuch about the Chief Justice in this latest ruling. I'll call it a ruling because it's not a full decision and all of that. When we come back from the break, though, I want to move to another topic, and that first article is on the Supreme Court ruling and Justice Alito. When we come back, we want to go to a piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews, because the other day we talked about this bipartisan group wanting to push forward a compromise. There's a new concept. We haven't seen that in a long time. $908 billion for COVID-19 and what that might mean, and some of the comments about it right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Most Americans say we face serious problems, and yet there is growing evidence we aren't really serious about serious problems. Ned Ryan wrote a commentary about an unserious movement for an unserious people. Although many of his criticisms are focused on the Republican Party, most of his comments apply to both parties and most political leaders today. He says we need to acknowledge that we, in many ways, have become an unserious people. No serious civilization and society would allow a fraction of what is taking place here, from the absurdity of our education system to the dominance of big tech monopolies to our current form of elections. Let's focus on the election system. The last elections were a reminder that we allowed mail-in ballots, questionable voting software, and voting rolls with lots of inaccuracies. For example, the mail-in ballot system we have has been rejected by nearly all civilized nations, even ones the left recognizes as among the most advanced. What about electronic voting? Canada will not even allow electronic voting. They have paper ballots and have observers installed in every polling station because of faith in the outcome of the elections is important there. In the past, I've asked how serious we are about education. Total expenditures for public elementary and secondary schools is $739 billion. That works out to more than $14,000 per public school student. Let me ask you a question. If I gave you more than $14,000 per student, would you spend it in the way we currently spend it? Same question for health care. We currently spend $3.6 trillion on health care. If I gave you more than $3 trillion to spend, would you spend it the way we currently spend it? Of course not. We aren't really serious. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our Friday weekend edition, and we are privileged to have in studio with us today Lathan Watts, Dr. Merrill Matthews. And Dr. Matthews, let me come to you for just a minute. And just the other day, we talked about the fact that there was a bipartisan group. Mark Warner and Joe Manchin and Mitt Romney and Susan Collins, two Democrats, two Republicans. They're more than that. I just thought I'd use the illustration because for our younger listeners, they have never seen a Congress that compromises. And yet those of us, especially Dr. Matthews and I, are about the same age. We remember a time in the 1980s and 1990s where it was compromise all the time.
Yes.
And whether it was Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich working with Democrat Bill Clinton, or even back in the Reagan years working with Tip O'Neill. We haven't seen that in a long time, but we did see it the other day. Now, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they'd like to spend $2 trillion plus on COVID relief.
Right.
Mitch McConnell, maybe about $500 billion. So they came up with, I don't know how it comes up with that odd number, $908 billion for the plan. Now, what gets left out gets me to our second article by Dr. Merrill Matthews. State and local revenues are looking good because in some respects, the Democrats want to send all sorts of money to the states and the local governments. And you've looked at the numbers and say, they're not really hurting that bad.
They're not. Yeah, one of the primary sticking points in these negotiations that have been going on for 3 months is whether or not money would go to state and local governments. Republicans have generally said no. Democrats said absolutely they had to. And Republicans said a lot of these states that you're wanting to throw money at have been spending their profligate. They just don't manage their money well. And so now you're asking taxpayers across the country to, in essence, come in behind them and bail out their bad decisions for years. Yes. And so that's been one of the key issues here. And in the $908 billion that you mentioned, they have $160 billion for state and local governments. And that got me thinking, well, are they hurting? Because back when this started, and they locked down the economies, you sort of figured this is going to hurt tax revenue and other things. People aren't working. They're not paying their taxes. People aren't buying things. They're not paying state and local sales taxes. So I went to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, which is one of the best sites out there for this. And they track that and they look at federal, state and local revenues. And interestingly, this for the third quarter this year that we just recently ended, they're up to nearly where they were in the first quarter of the year, which was actually actually a record. The third quarter of this year, they're actually receiving more money than they did three of the quarters last year.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's hard to say that you're really struggling financially. Now, they're spending a lot more money.
Yes.
Because of various things that they're doing. So you can make a case that, yes, their revenues went down in the second quarter. We got this V-shaped recovery that we've been talking about in the economy. We got the V-shaped recovery in their state and local revenues. So it's back up to about where it was before the collapse, but they have spent a lot more money. So you can make a case that some money should go there. Whether or not Congress will do that, I don't know. You can make that case, but you don't make the case that they should be getting a lot of money because revenues are there.
And I might just mention that we have posted that. It's the second article, and it actually takes you right to ipi.org. So we just made it real easy rather than repost it. And you can see this going up, and then it goes down, and then pops right back up again. So you can see that classic V. I've shown that a few times before. So if you wanted to see that from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, that is the case. It also has a little button there that says donate. And I want to encourage people as we go around the roundtable to consider supporting ipi.org. It's a great organization. And
we're
so
a nonprofit, and the donations are tax deductible. And that's a good thing to think about at the end of the year.
It certainly is. And if you didn't give on Giving Tuesday, which happened just a few days ago, I would encourage you to give to the Institute for Policy Innovation. Of course, we also have a link, I always do, for First Liberty. And certainly around the table mention some of those as well. One other point about that, and that is that you did mention just in passing that some of them are spending a great deal. And in your article, you mentioned California Governor Gavin Newsom spending $1 billion to buy face masks. Now, I think the last time we had Jackie Deason in here, she was saying, these people are spending like drunken sailors. And immediately I said, with apologies to drunken sailors. He said, yeah, I guess I shouldn't say that anymore. But that's the point. I mean, some of this is just an embarrassment, isn't it?
It is. And what happened with that particular situation is he spent nearly $1 billion on the N95 face mask, and then they found out shortly thereafter that the FDA wasn't going to approve the ones that these are from China.
Yes.
So it was a kind of a startup company that said they can do it. He handed out, I think he handed half the money to them.
Oh my gosh!
And then he said, well, we're not going to finish paying the rest of it. But eventually they did get the FDA approval. But it goes back, and I just, people can make mistakes in this. But what we hear is Donald Trump is the only person who's made mistakes in this pandemic. Well, in fact, Governor Cuomo, Bill de Blasio, and Gavin Newsom have made a number of mistakes, and a lot of other. When you go into a pandemic that you've never really seen before, you're going to make mistakes. But it's interesting that he was willing to spend $1 billion for a state.
It's just amazing. $1 billion. Now, just for a second before we get into another topic, since we're talking about Gavin Newsom, there is a growing number of individuals, and I'm talking about the governor of California, the governor of New York. We're talking about the mayors in Chicago and Washington, D.C. Since we're broadcasting primarily in Texas, we might talk about the mayor in Austin, who actually did his announcement from Cabo, Mexico. There is a point in time, Lathan Watts, where I think some people are saying, you tell us that these are the mandates, but none of you that are giving us the mandates seem to be following them.
The old do as I say, not as I do approach to governing never usually turns out well. And I mean, every time something like that happens, I think it's just another brick in the wall, so to speak, to quote Pink Floyd. But it inevitably is going to lead to, people just deciding to say, look, I'm done. I don't care what your orders are. There's a lot of COVID fatigue to begin with, and then you're out here living your life just like you used to, and trying to make me do all of these changes. Well, you know what? I'm finished with that. We're going to have church on Sunday. You do what you got to do. Where I'm going to go, to my kids' basketball game or whatever it may be. I'm going to do the things that I need to do to protect, the people that are close to me, within reason. I think there's a long and storied tradition of civil disobedience in this country, and I think we're about to see a new wave of it.
And one of the reasons, I would argue that one of the reasons why Donald Trump was elected 4 years ago,
that's true,
was exactly because of this, because of primarily sort of elitist, mostly liberal people saying, you have to do this, you have to live like that. I don't have to live like that, but everybody else does. And I think people got fed up with it, and Donald Trump came in there and sort of offered a different, kind of a different take on these kinds of things. And now as we're moving into a different area, back into the Joe Biden area, you see the left is still doing this stuff. And I don't think they just never seem to learn. And in Cabo, I mean, this is what is bizarre.
That one caught me.
It wasn't like, I as a mayor give this announcement, and then all of a sudden I get this invitation, or I need to rush over here to this for some reason. He's in Cabo when he gives the speech. You stay at home.
Right. Yeah. And, I think it also gets back to, like, if Newsom wants to spend $1 billion on face masks, then spend California's $1 billion on face masks. The argument over this, $908 billion, the folks saying, well, I mean, some of these state and local governments haven't really managed their money that well. If California wants to turn their state into a, third world communist hellhole, then that's kind of their business until they go via the federal government to me and ask for my tax money to bail them out. Like, federalism works every time it's tried. California wants to do that, let California do that. But it's, supremely ironic to me for members of Congress, Republican or Democrat, to be debating over money going to states because these people don't really manage their money that well. When was the last time the United States Congress passed a budget? Mm-hmm. Where is this money coming from to begin with?
Yes.
What is the deficit and the debt of the federal government right now? Because they can't seem to manage their money either. So it's ludicrous to me to hear these people negotiating. Whether or not you think the states need the money or not, which the revenues seem to be doing very well. If Congress wants to start pointing at state and local governments and to manage their money, well, maybe pass a budget, once a decade.
Yes.
Instead of just continuing resolutions to keep spending money we don't have at the same rate we spent it last year.
Yeah. Well, and as last time we had Stephen Moore on here, we were talking about the American government, or the federal government's broke. And I said, well, it's really more like about $27 trillion past broke, right?
Yeah.
If you start thinking about that. So like you said, where's the money coming from? We come back from the break. Let's, if we can, real quickly, maybe continue about this. One of the things we've pointed out is virus spreading in the homes, and in some respects, is a lockdown going to work? But also brings us back to something I found after we posted some of these articles. There are just more and more people that don't believe that COVID-19 is that dangerous, and that's a problem for healthcare workers. But when you have governors saying, I'm not going to follow my own mandates, what do you expect? We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. About a half an hour, we're going to have our national broadcast. We're going to then talk about some of the things which have surfaced as people have been investigating what may or may not have happened in some of these polling places, including a video that came out just the other day of Georgia poll workers pulling suitcases of ballots out of tables. Well, after everybody had walked out, at least 4 that stayed around to actually count all of that. So we'll get into those issues and a variety of others. But one of the questions I thought I'd put on the table is this still the coronavirus? After all, if the numbers are correct, every 30 seconds a person in America dies. This is worse than it's ever been, Dr. Merrill Matthews. But it brings us back to one of the articles I've posted, and that is with the virus spreading in homes, governors run out of weapons. You know, the quick go-to is, well, let's just lock down the economy. That didn't work. As a matter of fact, some of the places where the lockdowns took place, you seem like there were actually more spreading. So what about that? But the bigger issue I'll get to for just a minute is this one, which I didn't post, but it says COVID-19 disbelief saddles healthcare workers with another challenge. And that is you have a number of people that are convinced that this is just like the typical flu. It's not. That it is not that dangerous, that these reports about deaths are fake. This is all a hoax. And I think, first of all, you always have people believing in conspiracies, but it doesn't help when the leaders who are calling for us to follow these mandates break the very mandates they implement in the first place.
They do. And we were talking about that. Of course, the mayor of Denver here recently was encouraging everybody to stay in, avoid gatherings and Thanksgiving. Then he went and got on a plane and flew to, I think, a Thanksgiving gathering, if I remember right. And what was amazing about this is, going back to what I was talking about a minute ago, it wasn't like he gave this presentation and something came up and he said, oh, I've got to get on a plane. He knew he was going to get on a plane. And you just can't, when these kinds of things happen, people look at it and think, well, it must not be as bad as they're saying because they're not living by this. And if they were really concerned, they would be living by it. So the fact that the governors and the mayors and so forth may be out of tools, maybe good news now, because it's not clear that all the tools have worked that well. But yes, we're the thing that speaks most to me when you have questions about is the case numbers really as high as they say? Maybe they're not quite as high as that. Maybe they're mixing some other things in and so forth. We may find out that later, but many of the hospitals really are stretched right now.
Of course.
And that's where and going back into the early summer, April and May, many of them weren't. They weren't. Parkland was sitting around. They were laying people off because they did not have enough to do. Parkland Hospital, the County Hospital of Dallas. Mm-hmm. So it's a real challenge, and I think our people, whether there's a mandate mask or not, our listeners need to be very, very careful, because even if you feel like this is an issue of freedom, and I understand that, if you get sick, and you have to go to the hospital, you're putting strains on that system, and that's the ones that are really buckling under right now in some places.
Yeah, I think there's if there's a Venn diagram of conspiracy theorists versus people that want to take reasonable precautions versus people that say lock it down. That point in the middle is where a lot of people are.
Yes,
you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to think that we've overreacted.
Yes,
that like Dr. Matthews said, we locked everything down, because we didn't want to overload the hospitals, and several rural hospitals went bankrupt, and closed.
Yeah.
And how did that impact the health of the people in those counties when they needed someplace to go? So I think, we know more about it now than we did, clearly in January, February, March. I think if there's a consensus, forming out there, I hear a lot, just in casual conversation and talk radio and elsewhere, of people who are kind of now to the point where, we know a whole lot more. Everybody knows the risks. Why can we not treat this as assumption of risk? That You know the risk if you go out. You know the risk if you go to a bar. You know the risk if you go to a restaurant. You know the risk if you go to church. You know the risk if you go to Walmart. You know there is risk involved. So some people are willing to do that, and others aren't. If you're in a demographic that is particularly vulnerable, 65 or up, you have other health conditions. Yeah, you should probably be staying home as much as possible. If you're still working, you should probably be trying to do that, via telecommuting. If you have somebody, in one of those categories that lives with you, then you should too. You should do everything you can, to protect those folks. But why the one size fits all government mandate for everybody? I think that is what is frustrating to a lot of people. Why does the governor get to decide whose business is essential? That if you're a restaurant owner, bar owner, and you can only, either you're closed or you can only open at 50% capacity. Well, that business is essential to the people that work there. I guarantee you, that's their source of livelihood.
That's right.
Why is it that we can go to Walmart anytime we want to, but only 50 of us can go to church at the same time? It's all of this that I think the people are just tired of.
Yep.
That why can't we just we know the risks and operate on an assumption of risk model. You know the risk, you're willing to take it, others aren't. And you're right, it certainly seems to be more contagious than your typical flu strain, and it seems to be more serious depending on, your age demographic and health, than your typical flu strain. But we have, people die of the flu every year, and we have people who still don't get a flu shot every year. And we leave that up to them. Well, the government doesn't mandate XYZ because it's flu season, right? And if this virus is going to be, with us, for the long run, the way the flu virus is, if there's no, vaccine that eliminates it, like a vaccine for like polio or smallpox or something like that, then are we going to do this every year? I mean, is it going to be flu season and woo flu season? And woo flu season, we have to shut everything down. Flu season, you're on your own. I think that's where, the inconsistency is extremely frustrating to people.
Let's talk policy for just a minute. Dr. Merrill Matthews, one of the things I've noticed, and again, I found some of this from an article by Stephen Moore, so we keep talking about him. He's getting a lot of press today, is that he found that some of the advisors that are probably going to be, maybe not on the cabinet, but at least the kitchen cabinet for Joe Biden, are convinced that the reason the national lockdown didn't work last time is it wasn't stringent enough.
Yes.
So is that a preview of what we're going to see in the future?
I don't know how you would make it more stringent. The only thing you allowed during the first lockdowns for most states, because the vast majority of states did, was being able to go to the grocery store or the drugstore and get your prescriptions. I mean, that was just about it. So, and if you remember when they did the initial lockdown in most states, it was going to do this for 2 weeks, and then they expanded for 2 more weeks, and then they said, well, maybe 2 more weeks, and then we'll start gradually opening up. In Texas, I think, started opening up in May, and that was sort of the so we were in there for nearly 2 months, and we were one of the better states in terms of opening up sooner. And it's still, you had a decrease in the summer, as some thought, and then it hit back again here in the fall and winter. So it's a real struggle for us, and people need to be careful because, as I mentioned, when you end up imposing cost on the system if you end up having to go to the hospital.
Right.
And so, I'm all for you exercising your freedom, but there is an ultimate cost to the rest of us if you're not careful. And of course, in some cases, people get this and they don't have no idea. I mean, they were exercising all the due diligence and still end up catching it. So it's been a real challenge for us.
I might just mention that in the next hour, we're going to have Pastor Steve Riggle with us, Sing It Louder USA. And it's just something where they said, are some people just getting tired of being told that they can't go to Thanksgiving, can't go to Christmas, they can't sing Christmas carols. So they're going to go outside, I guess, and encourage people to sing Christmas carols, just as a nonviolent, kind of fun-oriented civil disobedience, if you will, just to make a statement. So we'll be talking about that. But again, the economic cost, you mentioned that. Again, the estimates were that every week of shutdown could lead to a loss of $250 billion. Let's go back with your number here. Over 2 months, that's $2 trillion. You know, a trillion here, a trillion there. Adds up to real money.
And we're seeing hiring slowing down even as we speak.
That's right. So again, those are just some things to look forward to in the future, and I just wanted to point people to that article. When we come back, though, we started out with religious liberty. Let's get back to it for just a minute. I thought at least mention it now. Maybe we'll do it in more detail because the statement in New York and the mandates in New York are paralleling in a lot of places, but the place that surprised me is Kentucky. What in the world? The good news is we are real fans of the Attorney General there in the state of Kentucky, and I know he's been working with you at First Liberty, so I thought we'd just give you an update on that as just another illustration of churches that are finding themselves kind of in the crosshairs. We'll talk about that right after this.
One disturbing result of the recent elections was a vote in the state of Oregon to decriminalize the possession of all illegal drugs. Roughly 60% of Oregon voters supported Measure 110, which makes it no longer a crime to possess a non-commercial amount of methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and a few other drugs. An individual caught with any of these substances faces a fine of $100, which can be avoided by undergoing a health assessment. The bill also establishes a new statewide drug treatment system funded in part by tax revenue from marijuana sales and state prison savings. Back in the 90s, Oregon became one of the early states to legalize medical marijuana. In this election, Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota joined the 35 states where it's legal to possess marijuana for medical and/or recreational reasons. The idea is that people suffering with addiction should be rehabilitated, not punished. Oregonians passed another ballot measure which legalizes the use of psilocybin, the active ingredient in hallucinogenic mushrooms, for mental health treatment. The District of Columbia did the same. The substance has previously been decriminalized in Oakland and Santa Cruz, California, and Denver, Colorado. Psilocybin is a Schedule I drug associated with a high potential for abuse and addiction. Drug legalization may be fashionable, but it's not a positive trend. Its bad effects will be felt by children who are not even taking drugs, but whose parents are. Naomi Schaefer-Riley, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and the Hudson Institute's John Walters write in the Wall Street Journal that more drug availability means more drug use, which increases interpersonal violence, which includes abuse and neglect of children. And as to the current wisdom emphasizing treatment over punishment, they point out that overdose deaths have skyrocketed, from fewer than 17,000 deaths in 1999 to more than 67,000 in 2018. We should end this destructive experiment with drug legalization. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Time for a few more minutes, and then on our national hour, which will happen in about 15 minutes, we'll talk about some of these voting irregularities that are surfacing in Arizona and Michigan, Pennsylvania, and other places, and Georgia in particular, which we'll talk about. But for just a minute, Lathan Watts, let me come back to you, because we kind of started out by talking about religious liberty, and for our listeners maybe in Kentucky, they'll be interested, but I thought it was kind of interesting. You're not really surprised that you see some lockdowns in Illinois, Michigan, California, New York. I'm real surprised that you've had so much difficulty in Kentucky, because actually one of the first cases you won was in Kentucky.
Yeah, that's right.
So give us some history here.
Yeah, the actually was the very first case in the country that dealt with First Amendment freedoms versus COVID restrictions imposed by government, and it was the very first case in the country, and we won, and it kind of set the tone going forward that we're not just going to completely ignore the First Amendment, because we're in a pandemic. But yeah, we've been very busy in Kentucky. We had that case that was on Fire Christian Church in Louisville. We had we helped out Ken Ham and the Ark Encounter Museum when they were trying to open, and now most recently, this case, the Governor Beshear shut down K through 12 schools in Kentucky, public and private. And so we represent Danville Christian Academy there in Danville, Kentucky. And his order, it just doesn't make any sense. It's K through 12 are shut down. Preschools are open. Universities are open. Daycares are open. Gambling halls are open. Grocery stores are open. Bowling alleys are open. So if you're a church and you have a Christian school that you're affiliated with, and it includes pre-K, a daycare facility or a mom's day out program, then that facility is both open and closed, because the pre-K kids can still come and sit, at the daycare for 8 hours. But older brother who's 5 and is in kindergarten, he can't go.
Amazing.
Even if it's the same building. So K through 12 is closed. Colleges and universities are open. So if you've got, son and a daughter, one's a freshman in college, age 18, and the other's, 17, going on 18, and a senior in high school, he or she has to stay home, but the one that's, a year older can still go to school, despite the fact that the CDC says that schools are amongst the safest places for kids to be because of all of the precautions that schools are taking. Our client, Danville Christian, has actually been praised by the local health authority and used as a model for other schools because of all the things that they have implemented. So we went to the federal district court when Beshear did this and asked for an injunction, and we got it. And then they appealed to the Sixth Circuit, and a panel of the Sixth Circuit stayed the injunction. So we went to the Supreme Court, and we filed that last week. So we're now waiting on Justice Kavanaugh, because it's an emergency order. The justices have the circuits divided amongst them, and Kavanaugh's the guy who sits for the Sixth Circuit stuff. So we're waiting to hear on that. We're hopeful, since 5-4 on the case in New York, they protected religious liberty, that this will be another ultimate win. If he doesn't grant the emergency relief, then the merits of the case are still preserved. So we could go back to the Sixth Circuit and ask the full Sixth Circuit to hear the case en banc and see if they would overturn the panel. And if not, then we take the merits of the case back to the Supreme Court. So the problem is the timing. You don't want to wait months and months and months for something that deals with K through 12 education, because there's only a few months left of the school year. So, which is why we're going up on an emergency basis. So, just stay tuned. We'll update our website and our newsletter and all of that. If you follow us, you'll be hearing more about it.
And let me ask you, Lathan, because I heard this the other day with Philadelphia. I think Alito was over that area and made some kind of quick ruling because he's the one in charge, which may raise a couple of questions. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but how do they determine which justice is over which area? Do they rotate those every now and then?
Yeah.
I mean, that would make a certain amount of sense, that if I'm over this area at some point, I'm over a different area. Or was I from that area generally, so I kind of know it a little better?
Right. Now, I think that's actually like an administrative function of the Chief Justice's office. So periodically, like once Barrett came on the court, I think they looked at it again and
they reassigned him,
kind of shuffled it a little bit.
Because we did talk about that the other day, how they do that.
But that's part of, if I'm remembering correctly, that's part of the gig as Chief Justice, is kind of administrative matters of the court. He sort of handles that.
So if you have that, if you get assigned one area, at some point you may be assigned a different area. You think?
It's possible. Yeah, okay. I mean they could rotate it. I don't know that there's anything set in stone as to how long they have to keep certain the order that they're in right now.
It looked like they changed it the other day. One of the things that was so interesting is I looked at it, and I did talk about it on the air just one day briefly, in case anybody cares about that. Sometimes I just tend to nerd out. And what was so intriguing is that some of them are contiguous. I think one individual had the 2nd and the 11th Circuit Court. Well, those are not necessary. You'd think you'd get a region, but not necessarily so. So who knows how.
And I just wondered if you would say, okay, we're going to give Ginsburg is going to be over Texas, and Thomas is going to be over New York and Illinois. Something like that.
I think they get to choose too. If I remember right, I think seniority helps a little bit, so Thomas could get whatever he wanted.
Probably.
I think you're right. Yeah. Boy, we have never had that question asked, so we'll see.
But it's important because you have that one who's over it, and that person can make that decision. And that's why it struck me. They might put one of the more liberal people over a conservative area, one of the more conservative or liberal, and I have no idea.
Just before we take a break, I thought I'd ask one other one, and that is if you go to your website, you also talk about this friend of the court brief on the nativity display, and that's in Indiana. Now, again, help me out, but I thought all the way back to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, we had solved this. And then don't we have like a Bladensburg cross case? Why are we still fighting any of these nativity scenes or creche cases? Explain that.
I mean, you're exactly right. We did file, friend of the court in Jackson County, Indiana, on a public nativity scene case where I believe it's the county courthouse, if I remember that correct. And there's lots of other things. It's not just the nativity scene, but you're right. The Supreme Court opinion in American Legion versus American Humanist Association, the Bladensburg Peace Cross case, basically said, look, if there's a history and tradition of something in this country, it's presumed constitutional. Now, what happens, I think in a lot of times if you've got, and I haven't looked to see, who the judge on this case is, but let's say you've got a judge who's been on the bench a long time. Okay. And they know the law, right? But they know the law as it was when they learned the law. And if you're not constantly, keeping yourself updated.
The lemon test and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And they're used to applying that. And so Supreme Court hands down a new case that says, actually, no, we're not going to use lemon anymore. Maybe they like the lemon test, and so maybe they're just kind of doing one of these, I didn't hear anything about this American Legion decision. Or maybe it's just that, that opinion is still relatively new and they're not accustomed to applying it yet. So that's why we look, we're looking, at cases like this all over the country to make sure, that the courts are applying that test correctly. So we're, friend of the court there. And then we have our own creche case in Delaware where we represent the Knights of Columbus on a very similar issue.
Yes. Well, let's take a break, but the application point here is if you have heard of something like this, a challenge of a nativity scene, a creche case, maybe you do have kids in school and they can't sing Christmas carols, they can't have red and green napkins at their Christmas party or their winter party, then, maybe you might want to call First Liberty and let them know. And of course, if you want to learn a little bit more about all these things happening in the world, ipi.org. So again, some great resources.
Yes, indeed.
Well, let's take a break, though. When we come back, we just have some videos that are suggesting maybe a little bit of electoral malfeasance taking place in Georgia. And most importantly, we want to talk about religious liberty and an attempt to sing it louder in America. We'll talk about that right after this.
Election day has come and gone, so tell me, do people like you need to be more or less vigilant, more or less informed, more or less involved in making an impact? I think the answer is clear. Those who value freedom of conscience and religious liberty need to do more than ever to stand up for what the founders gave us and put America on track for greatness. Yes, we face challenges, but it's in the hard times that the greatest victories are seized and won. I urge you today, right now, to seize this opportunity and join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Be part of the solution our nation needs. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The election is not the end of anything. It's another beginning. And when you join the Truth Team, you make it possible for millions of people to get the real news they desperately need and the practical marching orders that Kerby and the team at Point of View Radio give each day. Join us now in this critical moment. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We are certainly in the midst of our weekend edition, and if you would like to join the conversation, we're certainly going to open up the phones a little bit later to give you a chance to join that conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And we have Dr. Merrill Matthews, who's a resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation. One of his articles is about state and local revenues and how that relates to a $908 billion proposed compromise on the issue of COVID-19. And also, in just a minute, we're going to be talking, of course, with Lathan Watts, who is the Director of Public Affairs for First Liberty, because the first article has to do with the Supreme Court ruling in New York, and it relates to all of these mandates. So as a program note, I just want to mention in a few minutes, we're going to have, before this hour is up, Pastor Steve Riggle talking about Sing It Louder USA. He says, you know, if you've been really upset about all these mandates saying you can't have Thanksgiving, you can't have Christmas, you can't sing Christmas carols, he's calling for people to actually enjoy doing that. And so we're going to talk with him about that in just a minute. But to set that up, let's talk about the decision that came down from the governor in the state of New York, who said that, and it almost looks like, remember the old Twitter maps where you have the red and the blue and the, you know, in other words, if you're in this particular zone, looks like a Twitter bulb, you only can have 10 people in a church. If you're in this one, maybe you can have 25. You know, I go to a church where my Sunday school class is larger than that. So you filed a friend of the court brief, and the Supreme Court issued an injunction. Give us the background.
Yeah, so Brooklyn, the Diocese of Brooklyn, New York, versus Cuomo is the case. And there was also Agudath Israel representing some Jewish synagogues in that case. And they asked for emergency relief from the Supreme Court based on Cuomo's order. Because there are religious holidays coming up, and you know people want to get together, and not just want to, but you know their faith requires them to.
Sure.
And they were asking the Supreme Court to overturn, or stay this order by Cuomo because yet again he was treating religion different and worse than other institutions in society. If you're going to impose restrictions on where people can gather, government's obligation is to be neutral towards religion. To at the very least treat it the same as you treat other things and not treat it worse. And the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 to do so. So they basically told Cuomo, no, you can't do that. So we did file a friend of the court brief in that case. We're happy to see it come out that way. And it's similar to a case that we have in Kentucky, which we can talk more about later, but where we are asking the Supreme Court for emergency relief on in a similar situation with the governor of Kentucky.
So again, Dr. Merrill Matthews, one of the things that I hear so often is that, maybe churches are more dangerous, because they sing. Now, we're going to be talking with a pastor here in just a minute, but you are in a unique situation in which your pastor, who we've had on this program a number of times, Tommy Nelson, has actually got COVID, and some of his staff have
Some
as
of
well.
the staff did as
So
well, and they've all
yeah,
recovered. So we're happy about that. And it was not with regard to the church service anyway, because the church, as we came back in, the governor of Texas allowed churches to come back in mid-May. Denton Bible Church did. They come through between services. They sterilize. Every other row is blocked off. So people are supposed to stay 3 seats between each family and so forth. So they've sort of followed those guidelines pretty closely. But ministers have to sometimes meet other people, and of course they have families and others. And so several did come down with COVID, and they've recovered, and we're glad for that.
And again, I would think a pastor like Tommy Nelson, especially who's just had it, is probably going to have much greater concern for his congregation than some governor in another state, right? I mean, and so in some respects, this is the assumption that, well, the governors know best what is best for you. And I'm thinking, I'm not so sure about that.
A lot of churches last March decided when various states said we're locking down and we don't want church services meeting personally, I think a number of churches said, all right, this is the state doing it. They're saying it's for 2 weeks. We understand that, so we're supposed to abide by the laws, and we'll go along with that. That in most states stretched to 4 weeks, and then in some cases in 6 weeks. But what really, I think, turned the tide on this is when we found out, if you're in the church, we're at least keeping more distance than California Governor Gavin Newsom was in his dinner at a place called the French Laundry a few years ago. Yeah. Inside, he came out and said, well, we were doing this, at least it was outside, and then the pictures came up. No, Governor, you were lying. That was actually inside. And they're not socially distant. You're sitting all right next to each other. And this kind of hypocrisy is pushing the churches back. I mean, they're not going to take it if you're going to do that.
Yeah, we've obviously at First Liberty we've dealt and counseled a lot of churches throughout this whole thing. They want to know what they should do,
what they can do,
what they can do, what
yeah.
they can do, and our advice is really in this scenario is not much different than what it would typically be. Is that if you can comply, then comply. But when the government requires you to do something that you cannot, as a matter of conscience, do, that's when that's where you need us, right? That's where the rubber meets the road. And it's interesting that we even have conversations now about, well, the governor has allowed churches to do this, that, or the other. This country was founded on the idea that no citizen should ever be put in the position of having to choose between obeying their conscience and their faith and obeying the law. That should never happen here. Okay. If it does, I think on an individual basis, it's sort of up to the individual believer where he draws that line, where the line between, say, Romans 13 and praying for those, and not being afraid of the government unless you fear God, honor the king, that Peter said, versus, Sanhedrin, you do what you got to do, but we cannot we cannot help but proclaim the gospel. There's a fine line.
Right.
And I think each individual believer in their own behavior has to draw that line. Collectively, as a church or the governing body of a church, however your church is governed, elders or, deacons or a bishop or whatever, we have counseled, look, if you can comply, you should.
Yes.
Okay. There's no reason
be the
to
best
create
citizens you can be as Christians.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's we can go through a lot of
obey
different
the law
scripture
and do what you can to keep
that
people
mandates
safe.
Be
right.
a good citizen of your
right.
country, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's when you reach that point where the government is telling you to do something or requiring you to do something or prohibiting you from doing something that you feel is mandated by God himself via scripture. That's where our work comes in. Usually that's where the church is like, well, you know what, we're going to do this. All right, well, if you end up in court, we'll be there.
Yeah, it sounds kind of arbitrary when they say 10 or 25 and those kinds of things.
Right, if you're like Nevada, that casinos can be at 50% capacity, but you can only have 50 people in a church.
Yes.
Well, a casino, you can put, some of those places in Vegas are enormous. You can put 2,000-3,000 people in a casino, so their 50% capacity is 1,000, 1,500 people, but the church down the street has to stop at 50 people. That's where the government is not treating religion on an equal footing with other institutions.
Well, a little bit later, we're going to talk about this video out of Georgia showing people pulling suitcases of ballots out. But next, we want to talk about, well, what could you do? And we're going to talk a little bit about Shout It or Sing It Louder USA.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Most Americans say we face serious problems, and yet there is growing evidence we aren't really serious about serious problems. Ned Ryan wrote a commentary about an unserious movement for an unserious people. Although many of his criticisms are focused on the Republican Party, most of his comments apply to both parties and most political leaders today. He says we need to acknowledge that we, in many ways, have become an unserious people. No serious civilization and society would allow a fraction of what is taking place here, from the absurdity of our education system to the dominance of big tech monopolies to our current form of elections. Let's focus on the election system. The last elections were a reminder that we allowed mail-in ballots, questionable voting software, and voting rolls with lots of inaccuracies. For example, the mail-in ballot system we have has been rejected by nearly all civilized nations, even ones the left recognizes as among the most advanced. What about electronic voting? Canada will not even allow electronic voting. They have paper ballots and have observers installed in every polling station because of faith in the outcome of the elections is important there. In the past, I've asked how serious we are about education. Total expenditures for public elementary and secondary schools is $739 billion. That works out to more than $14,000 per public school student. Let me ask you a question. If I gave you more than $14,000 per student, would you spend it in the way we currently spend it? Same question for health care. We currently spend $3.6 trillion on health care. If I gave you more than $3 trillion to spend, would you spend it the way we currently spend it? Of course not. We aren't really serious. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, and in studio with us today, Dr. Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, and Lathan Watts, Director of Public Affairs for First Liberty Institute. And Lathan, we were just talking about the case out of New York and how many cases you fought in New York. Later on, for our listeners in Kentucky, we'll give them an update there because you've been really standing for the churches who've said that some of these mandates on the churches, or even in the case of Kentucky, on Christian schools, is beyond the pale. And one of the things that sometimes people ask is there anything we can do? And that's why I wanted you to know about Sing It Louder USA. And if you go to the website, which we have on our website, pointofview.net, you will find out that this Sunday, December 6th, is for really a nationwide gathering, and there may be one in your area, or you could actually initiate one. And the individual behind this is actually Steve Riggle. He and his wife Becky moved to Houston to actually begin at that time what was Grace Community Church, and that expanded to all sorts of different campuses in the Woodlands and Oceanside, California, San Marcos, and a variety of other places. But now is the pastor of a Grace Woodlands Church in the Woodlands, Texas, and also of the New Venture Grace, and president of Grace International. But Steve, let's, if we can, have have you tell the story, because anybody that watches your video or goes to your Facebook page, and Lathan, you got to love this. This is one of the posts on the Facebook page. For those of you looking online, it says, signed permission slip to celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas, including the singing of Christmas carols, and it's a picture of the Constitution. He's your kind of guy, right?
This is my kind of pastor.
But Steve, thank you for being with us, and talk about this idea of Sing Louder USA.
Well, thanks. By the way, thanks for having me and for sharing this. As we've gone through the last 2020 and all of the things that have happened relative to COVID, and then the governors and mayors and other officials, elected and unelected health officials, have there's no other way to say it than just seized power that they shouldn't have or didn't have. And so we end up with Thanksgiving with them telling us how many people you can have in your home for dinner. I mean, whoever thought in America we'd be at that place? And in some cases, telling people that they should put their mask back on between bites. And then for some time now, telling people, some telling people they can't sing. We know Christmas is coming, and that's going to come back out again. So I was thinking, if people don't stand up, this is going to become normative. So how do Christians stand up? Because we're not going to go throw rocks through windows. We're not going to do what people did to the police. We're not going to go out and burn down businesses. We're not going to do those kinds of things. So how, because you sort of feel frustrated, like, well, how would we stand up? So I was thinking about that one day, and I just thought, well, if they tell us we can't sing, if I'm the only one, I'm singing anyway. And so what if a whole bunch of people did that, like all over the country? And we just gathered to sing the songs of Christmas. We do it anyway. But what if we did it? It's like I told the church here, I said, look, if you're as fed up as I am, then this is a protest. We need to get together and protest these crazy decisions. And if you're just a really nice little Christian and you just go along with everything and you just can't bring yourself to protest, then this is a carol sing. Either way, you need to come. And by the way, for all of you that you just can't do anything without a permission slip, you always had to have a signed permission slip to do anything, then I'm giving you one. And the people who signed this one, their signatures matter way more than a governor or a mayor or anybody else's signed order that's telling you can't do it. This document guarantees you the right to talk, the right to sing, the right to have your own opinion, and the right to stand up when we see the tyranny that's being put on us today. So that's how it came about.
Well, again, I know that down there in the Woodlands, you're going to be doing this at, I think, Town Green Park. But some people say, well, if you got to wear masks, well, you can do it outside. You can socially distance. You can do all sorts of things. But it comes down to something we talked about, Steve, before we had you on the air, and that is Dr. Merrill Matthews, pastor, actually got COVID. He's been on the program with us before. And I can't think of anybody who would be more concerned about the health of the congregation than a pastor. And I think you are a pastor of a church and probably have much more care and concern about the members of your flock and want to do the right thing in terms of following any of the guidelines than an unelected bureaucrat in Austin, Texas, or in Tallahassee, Florida, Albany, New York, or something like that. What are your thoughts?
Well, so, the president asked for 3 weeks. So I thought, well, that's okay. We don't know a lot about this. I mean, everybody's sort of, you're out here just in the dark trying to figure this out. So, okay, 3 weeks. So we did that. We were already online, so that was no big deal. And then after 3 weeks, it was going to be another 3 weeks. So I said, well, okay, but we're going to go meet outside then. We really believe that the book of Hebrews is clear that, this is not my church. It's not the people's church. It's certainly not Emperor Newsom's church or someone else to say when the church can meet, what they can do when they meet, and how or if they can sing. because the Bible gives us clear instruction. Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. You don't need to be a language expert to understand that one. And so I said, we're going to gather. So after 3 weeks of that, I'm standing on this platform. It is in a Texas thunderstorm in the second service on Sunday outside. We have this plastic tarp over the top. Guys are taking broomsticks and pushing it up so the water will run off the roof. And in the message, I just said, is this not the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen? I said, we have a building right on the other side of that wall. In fact, I said, we have a brand new children's building that's done, and none of you have even seen it because we haven't been able to open it. So I said, you know what, next Sunday, we're meeting in the building. I don't care. We're going back in the building. If you're one of the people at risk, then you should consider what you do. But you're all adults. I'm not making those decisions for you. I'm not going to treat you like a child like these governors are doing. You make your own decisions. So we moved back in. First week, we tried all that. We come in, but it was just weird. The attendance was, of course, very low, and people are sitting 6 feet apart, three chairs, all these kinds of things. And in Texas, we do not have, the governor here has not issued a mandate to the church. We have guidelines issued by the Attorney General that were written by pastors. That's it. You can go by them. You don't have to go by them. The Attorney General said that. So we did that Sunday. We dismissed people by the row. The next week, I got up, and when I came to the end of the service, I said, look, if you're nervous about talking to people or somebody getting too close, you should leave right now, because in 2 minutes, I'm going to dismiss the service, and there will be people, I'm pretty sure, going to try to talk to you on the way out. So if you're afraid, you leave right now. Everybody else I'll just dismiss. And that everybody laughed, and that was it. And since then, we haven't done anything. We have a sign outside that says if you have any symptoms of COVID, obviously don't come in the building. If you want a social distance, go to the student center. You can do it there, and the rest of the auditorium. And for us, anyway, we're so far back that we're beyond where we were pre-COVID. So our services are quite full. That's the approach we've taken, and it's worked well. I think people are fed up with somebody telling them what to do.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, I'll keep you on for just another minute or two, because we have a link to singitlouderusa.com. And first of all, you might say, well, I may have just never heard of this. If you click on Find a Gathering, that goes on for page after page after page. So there are a lot of people that are participating, a lot of churches that are. So we want to talk about where you can find a gathering. Number two, there's a section there for Organize a Gathering, because we're giving you some time between now and Sunday. And then you might say, well, what songs are we going to sing? Well, there's a section on download the song lyrics, as well as connect on Facebook and Instagram. So we're going to come back and talk real quickly about that, because some people said, what can we do? And I think this is one action item that is kind of civil disobedience or a protest, but it could just be called a carol sing too. So whatever you want to think about it, but it's a great way to kind of stand up and exercise. I think those are called First Amendment rights, aren't they?
It seems like I've heard of that somewhere.
Yeah, so we'll come back and talk about that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continuing our conversation today with Dr. Merrill Matthews and Lathan Watts in studio. With us by phone for just a few more minutes, Pastor Steve Riggle. And if you want to go to our website, pointofview.net, you can find the link, or you can go directly to singitlouderusa.com. And Steve, let's talk about how people can participate, because we broadcast in about 36 states around the country. And as a result, they could click on this banner that says Find a Gathering. And as I look through that, there are places not far from where many of our listeners might be to actually gather to sing. Or there's also a banner that says Organize a Gathering. And what you're calling for is on Sunday, December 6th, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific. We also broadcast in Alaska, so I'd be up, I guess, at noon. So again, you have all sorts of places where you're trying to gather the body of Christ at one time to sing Christmas carols. What else do we need to know?
Well, it's that simple, and we're just encouraging people in their community to, someone to step forward. There's really nothing to organize other than to get the word out and meet at a courthouse, a park, some other known place in the community, gather and just sing those carols. And while they're doing it, take their phones and record it, and then put all of those together all across the country on social media, so people, and there'll be a way to do that. I don't know if it's on the website yet. Sure. But a way to do that so people can see that this is happening all over. So it's just that simple. We have so far that we know of, and there's probably a lot of these that we don't know about, because we're not trying to control anything here. We're just trying to give people a voice across the nation to stand up. And so we have 32 states so far that there are events in, and that we know of. There's I don't know what the number is, but there's over 100. We know that over 20,000 people have gone to the website. That's not Facebook or social media, just to the website. More than 20,000 have gone to that. So I'd encourage everybody to do this. I think if we don't stand up for our rights, they'll be taken away. As a matter of fact, they already have been. Mm-hmm. And so when they're taken away, they're rarely given back. And so it's time. We've been at this long enough now. It's time for people to finally say, no, we're not ugly, but we're not going to put up with any more of this. And this is a simple way that there can be a loud shout all across the country to those who are putting these onerous restrictions on everyone, and say we're not going to do that anymore, and we're simply going to do it by singing the songs of Christmas.
Sounds good to me.
And I was going to say, you, just to be clear, you don't need to be a church member or a member of any of the churches that are there. You could be a person who wants to sing those songs and doesn't like the government imposing those restrictions, and go on the website and find one. Is that correct? Exactly. We need all those people that were in those Trump trains, and people that were out there all of this season, the conservatives who through all this time have been really fed up with all this. We need everybody to show up.
Well, again, we have all that information on our website, and we also have a link to your Facebook page and all the rest. So simply go to pointofview.net in case you happen to be traveling right now, and you can find that. Or you can go directly to singitlouderusa.com. And Steve, I appreciate you putting that together, and wanted to give people a couple days advance notice, and that's really all they need, because if they follow the instructions there, it might be good if you have a large crowd to have a megaphone, but there's a place where you can download the songs and everything, and might even contact local media to see if they want to come out. And we appreciate you giving us the opportunity to gather together and to express our opinion. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me.
Lathan, this is back to, you lose your First Amendment rights if you don't use your First Amendment rights.
Well, that's exactly right. And you don't necessarily have to be a lawyer or a constitutional scholar to understand that, what the text of the First Amendment means and what it was intended to protect. And, the old conventional wisdom of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think that's what this pastor is talking about. You need to prevent your First Amendment rights from being eroded versus waiting until it's already happened and then turn around. So we need to really get back to, that's always more difficult. It's always, easier to stop a bad thing from starting than to let it get started and then try to roll it back later.
And just to address that illusion is the term government creep.
Yes.
And I'm using that as a verb, not a noun.
It works either way.
And the idea is if we are going to let the government tell us what to do on these things, then when we get past this, let's say, and now we just have a bad flu strain coming out, does the government have the right to come in and say, okay, this is going to be a bad flu strain, it'll pose some burdens on the hospitals, you can't meet in churches, you can't sing, or a different type of a virus coming out. So you want to have some pushback so that this doesn't become the norm. It's an exceptional circumstance, but exceptional circumstances sometimes become exceptional at times, and they're willing to say, we did it last time, we can do it this time.
Yeah, you said a mouthful right there, because some of the worst things imaginable, in just my humble opinion, of a shift in American culture has started from, well, this is a special circumstance.
Right.
And so we're going to do this extraordinary thing. And then that extraordinary thing becomes expected for the next thing that's not really that extraordinary. Like you'd never really seen the government intervene in an economy on the scale that FDR did until you had this extraordinary event of the Great Depression. But what resulted from that?
What was extraordinary becomes ordinary.
Exactly.
That's right.
You have this entire system, administer all of this stuff that we still have today that was started because of this extraordinary circumstance that we had to do something that we've never done before to deal with this thing we've never dealt with before. And so, and we're still stuck with it, right? We're still trying to get rid of it. So that you're exactly right. And in a lot of these states, where the governors are doing this thing, they're doing it empowered by really poorly crafted emergency powers laws.
Right.
That are very vague and very broad. And, where a governor could just, because we're in a declared state of emergency, so what's the next emergency? Now, that's Dr. Matthews' point. Is it a really bad strain of flu? Is it climate change is an emergency? And, when you exhale carbon. And so because I'm declaring, if I'm governor, that climate change is an emergency circumstance, I'm going to execute these emergency powers that I've been given under this statute, and no more singing in church until I say so, because climate change is an emergency, and you exhale carbon when you sing.
Oh, boy. Yep. And again, we're not discounting the fact that every 30 seconds another person in America dies from COVID-19. So we recognize that. As a matter of fact, on the third article here, it's about how viruses are spreading now in the homes and the U.S. governor's running out of weapons, So the solution is another lockdown. No, that hasn't worked very well before. What it can do is prevent the strain that is already beginning to be manifested in many hospitals. So there is a good action that can be taken, but at the same time, there's just an overreach. And when all of a sudden you can have just 10 people in a church service, 25 people, of course we'll get to Kentucky and some of the others in terms of the Christian schools. There's just a lot of examples like that.
And just how this expands, we just heard this week that the mayor of St. Louis is now going to say that racism is a public health crisis. And
oh boy!
In years past, we thought a public health crisis had to do something with actual health, but now it becomes racism being a public. I mean, it's these kinds of things expand and they grow bigger.
Let's take a break. When we come back, there is a huge video. It's kind of like the elephant in the room we haven't talked about, but we are going to talk about it now. If you're not familiar, and you may not have watched the mainstream media, matter of fact, they probably didn't cover it anyway, but they now have a video out of Georgia in which it shows poll workers pulling suitcases of ballots out of a table after they have everybody leave. There's only 4 people there. They're counting ballots without anybody looking, and I guess they didn't realize that there was a surveillance camera. And that has changed a few things in Georgia, not the least of which is that the Georgia Republican governor, Brian Kemp, who for a while was kind of on the opposite side of President Donald Trump and actually was fairly criticized by Donald Trump. The video footage has caused him to now maybe say, maybe we need to actually have an audit, you think, about that. So I want to talk about that. And, of course, also, since Dr. Merrill Matthews has known Sidney Powell for a long time, I want to get his perspective, because you had Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood the other day saying, really, since we can't trust the Georgia elections, you shouldn't vote January 5th. And that's a head shaker for all of us around the table. So, Georgia, we're going to be talking about you for just a minute, but we're not letting those of you in Michigan off either, because we have some really incredible testimony coming out of there, and Arizona, and a variety of others. So we've got a lot to cover. We will do that right after this.
One disturbing result of the recent elections was a vote in the state of Oregon to decriminalize the possession of all illegal drugs. Roughly 60% of Oregon voters supported Measure 110, which makes it no longer a crime to possess a non-commercial amount of methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and a few other drugs. An individual caught with any of these substances faces a fine of $100, which can be avoided by undergoing a health assessment. The bill also establishes a new statewide drug treatment system funded in part by tax revenue from marijuana sales and state prison savings. Back in the 90s, Oregon became one of the early states to legalize medical marijuana. In this election, Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota joined the 35 states where it's legal to possess marijuana for medical and/or recreational reasons. The idea is that people suffering with addiction should be rehabilitated, not punished. Oregonians passed another ballot measure which legalizes the use of psilocybin, the active ingredient in hallucinogenic mushrooms, for mental health treatment. The District of Columbia did the same. The substance has previously been decriminalized in Oakland and Santa Cruz, California, and Denver, Colorado. Psilocybin is a Schedule I drug associated with a high potential for abuse and addiction. Drug legalization may be fashionable, but it's not a positive trend. Its bad effects will be felt by children who are not even taking drugs, but whose parents are. Naomi Schaefer-Riley, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and the Hudson Institute's John Walters write in the Wall Street Journal that more drug availability means more drug use, which increases interpersonal violence, which includes abuse and neglect of children. And as to the current wisdom emphasizing treatment over punishment, they point out that overdose deaths have skyrocketed, from fewer than 17,000 deaths in 1999 to more than 67,000 in 2018. We should end this destructive experiment with drug legalization. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's, if we can, talk about the video. I'm just going to call it the video because it certainly has a life of its own. Now, the bottom line is we don't know the context, and there have been some people trying to find the context. So let's be fair about this, but at the same time, this has been, after a while, just almost the steady drip, drip, drip. You know, we've always around this table said, even if there was fraud, and there obviously is now pretty good evidence of that, is there enough to raise it to the level where you could overturn an election? And that's always the question mark. But whether it does or not, I think we finally have enough people acknowledging, when before you have the Brennan Center and most of the people in the media, a lot of Democrats say, oh, there's no voter fraud. You couldn't really say that. But again, if you have not seen the video, we have a link and you can actually watch it on this article I've posted. There's a number of articles out there. You can find it on YouTube video, but this was as good as any one. And if you have not seen it, it's video footage from Georgia. And they're showing individuals who the supervisors tell the poll workers and all the poll watchers to leave the room. You see them leave the room. Then, all of a sudden, some of these individuals go to a table and pull out suitcases filled with ballots under the table. And then they go through for about 2 hours in round numbers, actually running those through without anybody watching it. Now, there may be a good explanation for it. I doubt it. I believe in human sin nature, and so I think that is perhaps one of the better, if you will, smoking guns. But what about this? Because if nothing else, we've had all sorts of testimony. I'll get to some of the testimony in Michigan probably in the next hour because there's quite a bit that's come out of those as well. But this has caused even the governor, who before was kind of criticized by the president, to say, I think it's about time for an audit. What about this?
I would like to know, I would love to know, all the ballots that are in those suitcases, how many of them had votes for any other position other than president?
Yeah.
I mean, were there any other boxes checked? Or were those ballots
because we have
simply
found some
Biden
where
votes?
it's only voted for, and they were all Biden, interestingly enough, because we have examples like that now, too.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean, I would love to hear that. I would love to hear what the explanation for this is.
Yes.
I hope somebody from that county who runs the elections department there will find a way to get in front of a camera and try to explain what we just saw, or tell us that we shouldn't believe our own lying eyes.
And I would like to see the people who were counting those ballots deposed under oath.
Absolutely.
So that we know, we get their answers from them. And it, as we say, that may be a perfectly reasonable explanation that everybody understands, and it may not be. It may not change the election. If you even if you were to flip Georgia, that does not give Donald Trump enough electoral college votes to change the outcome of the election. But the issue is, we've been hearing from Sidney Powell for several days that this is that they have lots of evidence, but we haven't been able to see any evidence.
Yeah.
And this became a breach between Tucker Carlson and Sidney. As Tucker said, we've been trying to get Sidney on. We gave her the option of coming on for an hour. We gave her the option of coming on for a week. And Tucker made an important point, which I agree with him on this especially. He said, some years ago, there were things I would largely dismiss. I don't dismiss anything anymore.
He even does shows on UFOs, he said.
I'm open to things that I would normally have dismissed, because we've seen a lot of things that we wouldn't normally think would happen has in fact happened. And so I'm the exact same place. Sidney, if you've got some evidence here, let's get it out. She has been saying it's taking some time. I'm hearing things. It didn't sound that positive. I mean, it didn't sound like it was that credible in terms of I'm hearing things, we're getting information and so forth. But if we find out there's a video like this, there may be other information out there. I'm eager to see it, because it may not change the election, because the electors are going to meet in just a few more days on the 14th. It may make a great book. It may make, after that, it may make for a lot of changes in the state houses as they come up and say, we're not going to let this happen again. And it may be some people end up going to jail.
Yeah, I mean, there's a first time for everything, right? Right. Some people might go to jail. Usually, anybody involved in government that gets caught doing something doesn't end up in jail. It's just the regular people like you and me. Yeah, I think it will result in some state legislatures taking some action to protect, election integrity. There's a reason that in the Constitution, the founders entrusted elections to the state, and specifically to the state legislatures. The founders were, deeply suspicious of direct democracy, for lots of reasons. I don't think they had, vote-matic voter fraud in mind, but they were suspicious of direct democracy for a lot of reasons. The analogy I think it's I think it's Ben Franklin, that democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for supper. That's democracy. So there's a reason they said the Senate should be selected by the state legislatures. They said the presidential electors are selected by the state legislatures. Yes, they implemented democracy because who elects the state legislatures? You do that via the vote. So I think where the Trump campaign may end up being a day late and a dollar short is all of these changes that states made under the guise of, well, it's COVID and people are afraid to come to the ballot boxes, so we're going to have to, just mail out ballots to everybody, even whether or not you requested one, and we're going to do all, early voting is going to be, 6 weeks, and it's, you don't have to really have a signature that matches the ballot as long as it gets here. You don't have to have a postmark, just as long as we get it, but within 9, 10, 12 days of the election. All of these things were implemented before the election, and most, if not all of them, were not done via the state legislatures.
That's right.
Which is where the Constitution says this authority resides. So those things should have been challenged vehemently in the courts before any vote was ever cast, to say, if you want to do this, so be it, but you got to do it through the state legislature. Like, the ends don't justify the means. If you want to try to justify this because of COVID, then call your legislature and have them pass, a law. This is how this is supposed to be done. The governors were doing it. Secretaries of state were doing it. Boards of elections were doing it. Just deciding this is what we're going to do this time. That was really the moment. Now, it may play out, and you may see, something we've never seen before happen before. That it is 2020 after all, so nothing surprises me anymore. But I really think that was a huge missed opportunity.
And let me just say that since we're coming to a break, when we come back from the break, I'll try to go into a couple states, because like you said, even overturning Georgia's not enough, but you also have some interesting testimony, which we've talked about earlier in the week, from Pennsylvania, retired Colonel Phil Waldron, that said there was this batch that came in, and 99.4% were for Biden and 0.6% for Donald Trump. We haven't, of course, talked about what's going on in Michigan. Melissa Carone certainly said some things the other day that have gone viral. And even in Wisconsin, our friend Andrew McCarthy points out that just because the Wisconsin Supreme Court ducked the opportunity to consider the case, it was using the excuse, and it's probably reasonable, that the action has to be filed first in the circuit court. And of course, Lathan points out the clock is ticking, and that's kind of difficulty. But if nothing else, maybe even when we come back from the break, I'll get some comments about, for our listeners in Georgia, should they not vote in January? Because you have Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell saying, well, since it's not secure, we shouldn't even vote. And even the other day when the president spoke, he said, we know that there's probably corruption in the Georgia election system, but all the eyes of the world, at least all the eyes of America, will be looking at that. And I always have never been able to understand this. Oh, let's not vote for Mitt Romney to show those Republicans. Let's not vote for Donald Trump just to show, well, please. But anyway, we'll come back and get some comments about that. Most important, I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back, and we'll take your calls right after this.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees, and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of those phone calls. And in studio with us today, Lathan Watts and Dr. Merrill Matthews. We'll talk a little bit more about their websites in just a minute. Speaking of our website, we've posted a couple of articles, one on that video from Georgia, another one by Joy Pullman, which was in the Federalist. I thought it was very well written. Were insecure voting processes this year insurance policy for the Democrats? And, of course, Lathan Watts kind of addressed that just a minute ago. We talked about Georgia. And let me, just to be fair, before I take our first phone call from Georgia, to mention that also up there in Michigan, a person that has gotten a lot of press is a woman by the name of Melissa Carone. Now, her video has been seen 9 million times, in which she's made some pretty remarkable statements there in Lansing, Michigan. Because of this, I'm starting to see a trend, and that is the mainstream press up until now has been ignoring what's been happening in much of these testimonies that there have been hearings in Arizona, in Georgia, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania. The one in Pennsylvania got a lot of attention because of the testimony by retired Colonel Phil Waldron. He's the one that said, again, 99.4% of the votes went for Joe Biden in this one batch and only 0.6%. And, you know, does that make sense statistically? Melissa Carone's pointed out all sorts of electoral malfeasance. And so the other thing is they usually ignore these individuals, but in this case, okay, we've got to do a character assassination of these individuals. And this piece that came out the other day, which I thought was really helpful because it was pointing out just almost the disregard that the mainstream media has for these people. And Al Perota put it this way: clips of Carone at this fraud hearing have gone viral, seen 9 million times. Naturally, the Washington Post is running a hit piece on her this morning. Then some other people are making fun of her on a Saturday Night Live sketch. And he says, you know, boy, do they hate Americans, because, you know, if you just look like the average American and you support Trump or you're alleging fraud, that's enough for you to all of a sudden be in the crosshairs. So they, up until now, have pretty much ignored these hearings. Understandable, but now they're trying to figure out ways to make fun of the people that testify. And there comes a point in time where you say, there's a couple hundred affidavits. And as she points out, when this one person was challenging her, well, I filled out an affidavit and I'll go to prison if I lied. Have you filled out one? Which was a little bit confrontational for a member of the sitting Michigan legislature. But nevertheless, it's a good question to ask, because are all of these people lying? They've seen something, maybe not enough to overturn the election, but there's something there, right?
Right. And we know that there's fraud. I mean, here in Texas, excuse me, there was a lady at a nursing home who ended up getting something like 134, 137 mail-in ballots for people in the nursing home. And these are people who are, excuse me, really, they have real deficiencies. These were not people who were just seniors who wanted to get mail-in ballots. And she's been charged, I think, by the Justice Department with fraud. So fraud does go on. We've known that for some time. The question has always been, is it widespread enough? Is it big enough to actually change elections? In some cases, it can be. right now Joe Biden's got a big lead in the votes, and I'd be surprised if all of that was fraud.
Yeah.
And he has a big lead in even several of the key states that we're talking about. But it will be very interesting. We probably don't have time before the Electoral College, so I suspect Joe Biden will be confirmed in the Electoral College and he'll go forward. But what I hope comes out of this is a lot of state legislatures, especially some of these Republican states, because several of these swing states that Michigan, Pennsylvania, and so forth have Republican legislatures in there, that they will come up and make some changes. And we actually, the silver lining may be that we actually come up with a much safer election going forward than we've had right now.
Let's see if we can. One of the callers really wants to ask that question. So let's go to Georgia. Helen, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kirby. I heard on one of your previous shows that there was fraud back in the late 1800s, and Western Union was involved.
That is correct, 1876.
Right, and it took 4 months or so to determine that it really had been fraud.
And that's back in the day when the inauguration was in March, not in January. Yes, Again, got a history major sitting across from me here, so Lathan's going to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if I say something.
You're nailing it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, from the way I'm hearing everything, after the Electoral College makes their determination, can this not be overturned if fraud is proven when time allows it to be proven, if that's how it all plays out?
And there's another, if you will, the framers had so many checks and balances. There's one more after the Electoral College, which meets a week from Monday, and that is in January, the Congress has to confirm this, has to ratify it, whatever term you want to say. And if there is a member of Congress that says, wait a minute, I challenge that, and it has happened before in history, then, you have a different situation. But so there is still a possibility after December 14th. But probably very unlikely, because who's going to overturn the will of all of these different states and these electors?
And Helen, I'll just mention that when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, when they went to to Congress in January, several Democrats stepped up to try to say we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do this. Right. And at this point, because Joe Biden was overseeing this as the still reigning vice president, if I remember right, he says, "Come on, guys, it's over. We got to just go ahead and confirm this." So there are some road bumps that could be put up. I don't know that it's very likely.
No. And since we're talking about that famous election in 1876, which was thrown in large part because Western Union had a monopoly, sounds a little bit like Google and some of the social media.
Social media, yes.
They actually, in a couple of states, sent both electors. They sent, for example, let's use Pennsylvania. They sent both Republican and Democrat electors to Pennsylvania. And, of course, a couple of the states were really controversial. Hate to say it, for those of you in Louisiana and Florida, voter intimidation was rampant there. For our listeners in South Carolina, I love this one. Even though they had remarkable amount of voter suppression, especially of the black vote, nevertheless, the official turnout in South Carolina was 101% of the eligible voters. So that's where then they actually had to, in Congress, determine which electors we accept, the Republican electors or the Democratic electors. And through all sorts of negotiation, eventually, Rutherford B. Hayes won 185 to 184 over Samuel Tilden. So that was one of the more contentious elections. Let's hope we don't have that one, right? But Helen, you've asked very good questions, so I appreciate you calling us today here on Point of View.
Okay, thank you. May I make one more comment?
Sure.
As a resident of Georgia, it is very disheartening to have seen that video and that they had claimed there was a water main break and all the things that just don't stack up.
Sure don't pass the test, do they?
I'm
going to a break. Let me put you on hold because I think you got another point to make, and it does not pass what I call the straight face test. But I'm seeing more and more people lying to my face with a straight face, so I got to come up with another idea. But we'll come back with that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Most Americans say we face serious problems, and yet there is growing evidence we aren't really serious about serious problems. Ted Ryan wrote a commentary about an unserious movement for an unserious people. Although many of his criticisms are focused on the Republican Party, most of his comments apply to both parties and most political leaders today. He says we need to acknowledge that we, in many ways, have become an unserious people. No serious civilization and society would allow a fraction of what is taking place here, from the absurdity of our education system to the dominance of big tech monopolies to our current form of elections. Let's focus on the election system. The last elections were a reminder that we allowed mail-in ballots, questionable voting software, and voting rolls with lots of inaccuracies. For example, the mail-in ballot system we have has been rejected by nearly all civilized nations, even ones the left recognizes as among the most advanced. What about electronic voting? Canada will not even allow electronic voting. They have paper ballots and have observers installed in every polling station because of faith in the outcome of the elections is important there. In the past, I've asked how serious we are about education. Total expenditures for public elementary and secondary schools is $739 billion. That works out to more than $14,000 per public school student. Let me ask you a question. If I gave you more than $14,000 per student, would you spend it in the way we currently spend it? Same question for health care. We currently spend $3.6 trillion on health care. If I gave you more than $3 trillion to spend, would you spend it the way we currently spend it? Of course not. We aren't really serious. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Merrill Matthews, Lathan Watts, and we have on the program for just another minute or two, Helen from Georgia. And Helen, you were pointing out something that even some around the table are saying, I didn't know that. Apparently the excuse to actually usher some of the poll workers and others out of that room was an alleged water main break. And that's, again, doesn't pass what I call the straight face test, does it?
No, it doesn't. But see that was what I wanted to say, Kerby. The runoff on January 5th for the Senate, it just seems like a futile effort because, to your earlier point, jail time is very unlikely for whoever is the mastermind behind all of this. And I do think that when we test the spirits, that is a true statement, that there is a huge mastermind behind this trying to determine this election.
Unfortunately, we got a little bit of a click on the line there, but nevertheless, that brings us to something that I wanted to especially get a comment from Dr. Merrill Matthews, because you've known Sidney Powell for years, and Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell the other day that are investigating all of the electoral malfeasance in Georgia, saying, until we get this fixed, you should not vote in this election. And I think, first of all, there are 2 U.S. Senate seats that will determine whether or not Joe Biden can push everything through or whether or not there will be some kind of check and balance. And I recognize that there have been some that say, why bother to vote in what's a rigged election? But even Donald Trump the other day when he spoke said, all the eyes of America are going to be on Georgia. So I think the chances of some kind of electoral hanky-panky probably a little less likely in Georgia. But I don't understand why Sidney Powell, who we think so highly of, actually said, hey, don't vote in the election.
I've known Sidney for a while. She worked at the Justice Department for a while. She wrote a book, License to Lie. People can check that out. It's a big book, and it's a very good book. And I've even had Sidney on this summer when I was sitting in your seat over there to talk about Michael Flynn, because she was running Michael Flynn's case. And, it's interesting, when she announced at a lunch I sponsor, that she was going to be Michael Flynn's attorney. This is maybe a couple of years ago or so. Most of us said, well, good luck with that. And it turns out she just knocked him dead. I mean, she did a great job on that. And so when she got involved in this, I think the general assumption is that she's a bright person. She knows what she's doing. When she had a press conference here about, 10 days ago or so, and she was there with Rudy Giuliani. She struck me as nervous and somewhat emotional about this in ways that I haven't seen her before. And so she says, we've got information coming in. We're going to be releasing this as time moves on. And I was thinking to myself, this doesn't look like the Sidney that I've seen before, but it may be just because she's so upset about this. But she needs to come out with something pretty quickly, because this is going to be wrapped up and closed here pretty soon. You can come back and look at it later, but it's going to be a done deal here pretty soon. And so I was a little surprised with this notion of the be careful about voting in the Georgia Senate runoff because of these irregularities that they're seeing and problems, because if there are, they seem to be targeted towards the president. Now we're talking about Senate, and Perdue actually won his race. He had more votes, a plurality. He didn't get 50%, so under Georgia law, he's got to run again and have a runoff. But he actually won the largest number of votes in that.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting if now the governor is saying, well, maybe we should do an actual audit of each ballot. I think one thing that could be an unintended consequence of that is that if there are found to be a certain number of ballots that are invalid, say they're mail-in, there's no signature, or whatever the case may be, if those are tossed out, then the total vote count goes down.
Right. And
the Senator Perdue, he finished on election night with like 49.67%. I mean, he was within a hair of winning
and
by a majority.
He was over 50% for much of the night.
Exactly. So my point is, if they did an audit of those, if they weren't just checking at the top of the ticket, if they were, they're looking all the way down, if a number of those ballots get disqualified, rightfully so,
then
the vote total comes down, and Perdue might actually have 50% of the vote.
That's what I was thinking.
And then that election is over.
And
now you're just down to one runoff with Loeffler.
And you start talking about John James in Michigan, which was close.
Right.
And you talk about David Perdue, and you maybe only have one runoff. So, I mean, there are all sorts of what-ifs that you could start playing once you start down this road of reevaluating some of these votes.
Yeah, but I do think it's bad advice to say don't go vote in the Georgia Senate races. I mean, in politics, nothing is ever over. Right? I mean, it's just never over. There's always another fight, and it's the war is only over when you stop fighting.
And I would say my understanding is they've got a huge number of requests for mail-in ballots for the Georgia Senate race.
Imagine that.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Yeah. But I would encourage people go down there and vote in person.
Yes, sir.
And I think you're going to be safe.
One more point before we move on to some other issues. We're talking about how this vote fraud doesn't matter most of the time because the elections aren't that close. But for our listeners up there in Iowa, this one is really close. About as close as I've ever seen in a U.S. congressional election. I've seen some pretty close ones in state legislative elections. I've, on a few occasions, posted some ties that were in like city council races and things like this. But interestingly enough, Marionette Miller Meeks won by 6 votes over Rita Hart. Now, she's the Republican, Hart was the Democrat, and so as if you didn't have another controversy, the Democrat now is appealing to the Speaker of the House, that would be Nancy Pelosi, to actually have the House of Representatives under the Federal Contested Elections Act to have the results of the election overturned. I can't see even Nancy Pelosi, and I say even Nancy Pelosi doing this, but if nothing else, talk about close. 6 votes different. You might say, well, they have to do a recount. Oh, they've done 2 recounts, and it is 6 votes, which is amazing. And of course, if they were to overturn it, then you'd be actually disregarding the votes of 400,000 people in Iowa. So just think about this.
Yeah, and that's the bigger picture, honestly, on all of these things about was there fraud, was there not? Okay, if there was, for every fraudulent vote that's counted, a legal vote is discounted.
Right.
Okay, if somebody gets away with fraud, your vote doesn't count.
Yes.
You know? So that's why all of these investigations should
all for them.
Go forward.
Yes.
And we should, you know, it's human nature being what it is. Nothing is ever perfect. You're not ever going to completely eliminate, you know, fraud, waste, and abuse from any government program, including elections, right? But we should strive to have it as clean a process as possible.
Though I would agree with you that I would be surprised if Nancy Pelosi acts on that. But if the House was an even split right now and that vote made a difference,
don't you know?
My guess is they would find a lot of reasons to overturn that election and then put the Democrat in to give Nancy the majority.
Now, one of the things that I've had some people say off air, but let's answer it on air, why is it's taken so long to actually get the answers to some of those? I mean, Burgess Owens in Utah, he just, quote, won the other day because some of these are so close and they want to make sure that what you have is you have the mail-in ballots or the absentee ballots, then you have the in-person ballots, and then you always have some of the provisional ballots.
Right?
And so those, you might say, what's a provisional ballot? You come in here and guess what? Your hopefully you have voter ID. Your license plate doesn't match that, you know, in terms of the fact that you moved, but you didn't update that. So they say, okay, we'll give you a provisional ballot, and we'll only count the provisional ballots if it makes a difference. Or in some cases, I know, and I know this makes people upset, but I do know of some jurisdictions where they don't count military ballots unless the military ballots would have made a difference. And I get all sorts of people upset about that. The military should be the first ballots we count. I disagree. I'm just talking about what happens. And so in some respects, it takes a while. It's not that these people just can't count 1, 2, 3. They're just all sorts of technicalities in terms of the election that has caused us to finally be able to say that this particular candidate, which again is Dr. Mariannette Miller Meeks, won by 6 votes because they had to go through the process. Then they did a recount. They did a second recount. And finally, she's going to be serving in the United States Congress from Iowa because she won by 6 votes.
Unless Nancy pull something out of the hat.
Here we go again.
And you never want to underestimate their ability to do that.
Okay, we come back from break. I want to ask Dr. Miracle Matthews a few things here. First of all, there have been some people wondering about these vaccines. No real ethical questions about Pfizer and Moderna. But the other day I talked about how some have been a little bit concerned about AstraZeneca. So we'll talk about what that meant. And then I did post one also, since you're being the expert on climate change and things like that. The climate warriors are eyeing your plate, even what you eat. We'll talk about that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, and let me just for a few minutes encourage you to go to our website, because we're going to, in just a few minutes, maybe talk about some of the great resources at firstliberty.org, also the resources at the Institute for Policy Innovation, IPI.org. And again, if you have any trouble finding those, the first article here is one from First Liberty. The second article is from IPI, so you can actually just follow those to the websites. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, this is one that I'm starting to get questions about. The other day, I pointed out that pro-lifers have said that they really have no concerns about the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine, at least in terms of any kind of moral issues. And I quote from a number of sources. Matter of fact, some people said, what are your sources? Well, one is called Christian Headlines. Another one you can find, which is actually at the Susan B. Anthony list. They have a group called the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and they list both Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines as ethically uncontroversial. I think they should have just said not controversial or ethically acceptable. But they do list AstraZeneca/Oxford vaccine as unethical because it uses a fetal cell line. Now, what I've run into is a few people have said, well, I checked it out, and no, they're not using aborted fetal material. No. And again, when somebody says that, that's true, but it's misleading because the concern is that they're using a fetal line. As a matter of fact, the number is HEK293, and it's a fetal cell line which was derived from abortions. So, no, it's not true that they're taking aborted babies and using it to make vaccines, but they're using a fetal line. And it kind of reminds me, you and I will remember this, back in 2001 when President George W. Bush was giving that incredible address at that time about stem cell research. He did make the exception that some pro-lifers had a problem with, of saying, well, if we already have an existing stem cell line or fetal line, that would be acceptable for funding, but we wouldn't fund any that would be created. So in some respects, let's be honest, Moderna and Pfizer are probably the most likely vaccines you're going to run into in the United States.
Right.
Anyway, but what about that? Am I accurate enough in the way we try to explain
no,
it?
I think that's right. Several of the groups had established fetal cell lines. Of course, we're talking about a company that is the different one, but those were continued to be used, and so George Bush made the case.
Right.
It had some pushback, as you point out, but for the most part, these have already been existing, and the concern among the people who wanted to expand it was that these fetal cell lines end up deteriorating over time, and so they're not as effective. So they said we need to continue using or putting in new fetal cell lines, but I'm not aware that they've done that to any real extent.
I haven't either. And so again, some people have said, well, where are you getting that information? And again, I mentioned the Susan B. Anthony list, and we of course had the experts on there. Also, the National Catholic Bioethics Center, and of course you hold a chair on bioethics and have done this for many years. Have thought about that, and so the National Catholic Bioethics Center also said that they thought the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are ethically sound. So those are the ones you're going to run into. And back to the vaccines. First of all, Pfizer is probably going to keep them right here in the United States. It's unlikely that the Pfizer vaccine is going to go to the third world. Talk about that.
Very unlikely. That's because Pfizer is a 2-dose vaccine. You take one, and then about a month or 6 weeks later, you take the second one. It's the second one they have to keep refrigerated to minus 94 degrees. Now, that's colder than Alaska.
Even for our Alaska listeners out there. Yes.
So it is, and this is true in any kind of medical, especially with pharmaceuticals. They have to, all of them need a certain amount of maintenance in terms of being able to make sure they're not being compromised because they're got too hot, too cold, too old, or something of that nature. That's true with almost all of them. When you have something like that, you're just not going to be able, third world countries are just not going to be able to manage that because it takes this very special handling. And so when people have come out and said, have criticized Pfizer, they're trying to get them to the U.S. first rather than other places. They're not going to be able to go. Those are not going to be able to go to third world. In addition, both Russia and China are saying they have approved vaccines that are going out right now. And China has said theirs has gone to, I think, if I remember right, like 1 million people, many in other countries. They want to use these as a way to expand their influence, especially in third world countries. So many third world countries are going to be able to get those. AstraZeneca has said they're going to do that as well. But it's more difficult for Moderna and Pfizer to be able to do that. I'm sure they'll be getting some into Europe. I think I saw that Europe is buying several million doses of the Moderna, I believe it is.
Yeah.
It's
out of Boston. Yeah.
Right. So they'll be expanded, and there are going to be places where they're going to be able to get those out to the to third world countries as well.
So again, we just wanted to answer that question. We have had some of those questions off air, and sometimes you have people saying, well, where'd you find that? And I can post some more articles on the website, but you can find them pretty easily. And the real issue is that the ones you would be most likely to take would either be the ones here in America, Pfizer or Moderna, which brings me to another question I want to have on the round table. Who gets that first? And how many of those doses will be available? Because in about a week or so, it's possible that some of the frontline workers, these would be people in hospitals and other places, actually could get the first injection. True?
Yeah, I think Pfizer's already shipping some. Now, the news came out last night that they're having trouble getting some of their basic ingredients, and so they're not going to be able to make some of the deadlines that they were hoping to make. But millions are being prepared and shipped out right now, including in Texas where we are, and there's going to be there's guidelines from the CDC about how that should be done. States are going to be able to establish their own. I think almost all of them are saying we want to get these to first responders, healthcare people. I would encourage the police and some others like that. Nursing homes, especially seniors in nursing homes, because those have been such a widespread place. And then I suspect seniors after that will follow line. And we're probably looking at maybe January, early February for some people in that group. And then for those who are younger and healthier, Lathan here, he may be way down the line.
Term.
Yeah. He's pretty healthy, so we'll put him at the end of the line. But what's your thoughts about that?
That's fine with me.
But it's an ethical question, you know.
Yeah.
Now you're going to have to start people saying, if my uncle had been able to get the vaccine, he wouldn't have died. So that's going to be a bigger issue.
Yeah, that's where you're going to see a lot of a push for certain types of liability protection for the manufacturers and all this other stuff.
On that. Yes.
Yeah, you'll see legislatures enact that stuff. I suspect when the Texas legislature convenes, they will probably pass something early in the session to address that sort of thing, because otherwise it'll be a rush to the courthouse from plaintiffs' lawyers and everybody else. But yeah, I think the order that Dr. Matthews is talking about is the one that makes sense. You start with people that are treating COVID cases. They're obviously going to be exposed to COVID on a scale that the average person is not, and then the most vulnerable population. The nursing homes have been a serious problem. Yes, let's go there, and then let's go beyond that to the populations that are the next most vulnerable, which would be probably senior citizens at large and or people with comorbidities. Regardless of their age, if they have a certain other health condition that would make COVID a real threat to their life, that should probably be the next group that you go to, and then it's pretty much everybody else.
And one of the ethical issues here that I don't think they're talking about much is, of course, the Russia and China have not been nearly as transparent in their development of their vaccines and the approval.
Very true.
As the U.S. Yeah. And they're wanting to make sure that they use those in other third world countries. And so, right after Pfizer came out and said ours is 90% effective or so, within 2 days, Russia came out and said ours is 92% effective.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Well, really? And because this is becoming a country issue. They want to be able to say that they are out there and they're leading the way and they've got one, but we have no idea. And those are going to be going to millions and millions of people, including people who are in third world countries, and they may not have any other option. And there's an ethical issue about non-transparency in this.
So I think so.
I fear the Greeks, even when they bring gifts, fear the Russians and the Chinese, even when they bring vaccines.
I saw a commentary the other day that they were talking about how Bernie Sanders said, I'm not going to take the vaccine because it was developed under Trump. And somebody said, why'd you take the Chinese vaccine?
That was me.
That was you. I thought
piece.
you were that.
I did it. And
I almost was going to say it was yours, but I thought if I said it was yours and you said you didn't do it.
I just suggested he should fly to Russia or China and take one of theirs, because if you like government-run health care, there you go.
No, you honeymoon in Moscow. Just go, have a second honeymoon and get the vaccine while you're over there.
I mentioned the second honeymoon in there, actually.
Well, again, I was pretty sure it was yours, but I thought I'd throw it up there and just check, because I thought if I say you said that and then you didn't, you go, no, I didn't say that. But it's another one of those that you can find at ipi.org. You can see I read all your stuff, and but I didn't give you credit for that until you jumped in.
You just don't remember who wrote it.
No, I was pretty sure it was you, but I was just being real careful the other day. But when we come back, I haven't given out the phone number because we had some trouble with our phones, but it looks like they're working. So I'm going to take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
One disturbing result of the recent elections was a vote in the state of Oregon to decriminalize the possession of all illegal drugs. Roughly 60% of Oregon voters supported Measure 110, which makes it no longer a crime to possess a non-commercial amount of methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and a few other drugs. An individual caught with any of these substances faces a fine of $100, which can be avoided by undergoing a health assessment. The bill also establishes a new statewide drug treatment system funded in part by tax revenue from marijuana sales and state prison savings. Back in the 90s, Oregon became one of the early states to legalize medical marijuana. In this election, Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota joined the 35 states where it's legal to possess marijuana for medical and/or recreational reasons. The idea is that people suffering with addiction should be rehabilitated, not punished. Oregonians passed another ballot measure which legalizes the use of psilocybin, the active ingredient in hallucinogenic mushrooms, for mental health treatment. The District of Columbia did the same. The substance has previously been decriminalized in Oakland and Santa Cruz, California, and Denver, Colorado. Psilocybin is a Schedule I drug associated with a high potential for abuse and addiction. Drug legalization may be fashionable, but it's not a positive trend. Its bad effects will be felt by children who are not even taking drugs, but whose parents are. Naomi Schaefer-Riley, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and the Hudson Institute's John Walters write in the Wall Street Journal that more drug availability means more drug use, which increases interpersonal violence, which includes abuse and neglect of children. And as to the current wisdom emphasizing treatment over punishment, they point out that overdose deaths have skyrocketed from fewer than 17,000 deaths in 1999 to more than 67,000 in 2018. We should end this destructive experiment with drug legalization. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, I'll take some phone calls. And to dig myself out of that hole, we have as our second link there to ipi.org, Bernie Sanders should opt for a government-created vaccine from China or Russia, written by Dr. Miro Matthews in The Hill. Now, you did get quite a few comments about that.
I did. Not all of them kind, let's say. In fact, it would embarrass many sailors.
So anyway, I thought it was a great line, though. So if you won't take the Trump vaccine, and it's going to be called, watch when it's successful, how it'll all of a sudden be the Biden vaccine.
That's the last paragraph of the piece.
But,
all
but
this
if
concern
it's,
about the
not
validity of it and so
successful,
forth is going to go away once Joe Biden gets in.
Yeah, if all of a sudden there are all sorts of people that get some kind of counter reaction, then it's going to be the Trump vaccine. But otherwise, it'll be the vaccine.
Right.
Yeah, and so that gets us to one of the calls. So let me click on this button here, and I think our phones are working again. In Missouri, KTTK, Christine, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, sir, for giving people a voice. I appreciate it.
Oh, would love to hear your comments.
I want to talk about the ethics of vaccines. It says in the Bible that some slanderously report that we say, "Let us do evil, that good may come of it." Beside the point that many vaccines are made by the exploitation of murdered babies, few people, not many doctors even, know that all vaccines are so highly toxic that if one were to be spilled on the ground, they'd have to get a hazmat team to come clean it up.
The good news is, Christine, is that both the Pfizer and the Moderna take a completely different approach. This is the first time we've had, this is called mRNA, messenger RNA. There is no live material in these. There is none at all. They are going in and they're targeting part of the receptors in there that they get them to change a little bit. But this is not like your traditional vaccine where you use either a live or a dead or a portion of a virus. They're not doing that at all. So this is completely different.
And that's a good point, because one of the concerns, I think all of us around the table, but especially some of the people that have talked about, being concerned about vaccines, is if you use a attenuated virus, then it could come back. But this is actually using mRNA to get your body to produce the antibodies as if you had the virus. And so in some respects, I wish they didn't call it a vaccine, because it's almost a different category than some of those vaccines that we've really talked about in the past that have been, I think, raising some very legitimate concerns.
Right, and they're using a completely different approach to it. One of the reasons, I heard this the other day, I found this out, Moderna was able to, because they've been working with coronaviruses for a while, but as soon as this came up, they were able to do it, essentially come up with this one in like 2 days. I mean, went very, very fast because they kind of knew what they were doing, but they're using this whole new process than traditional vaccines.
Yes. So again, raised a very good question, and again, I wish they didn't call them vaccines, because people have, this anti-vaccine concern.
There's a concern for it out there, and even right now, when you take the polls, roughly half the population says they're not going to take a vaccine. It gets that number goes up, or more people say they will if it looks like it's getting more deadly. But the good news is, if you get 50 to 60% of the people taking the vaccine, and then plus you have a number of people who've already had it, you probably hit the herd immunity anyway. So those who have a conscience or a concern, we may be fine anyway, just because you've got enough people taking it and enough people who've already have immunities built up through having had it.
Let's take another phone call. We'll go to South Carolina. Pam, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Yes, I was listening earlier, and I agree that medical professionals, emergency care professionals, nursing home patients and professionals should be at the front line for receiving the vaccine. But what about public education teachers, private education teachers? We want to get them confident enough to get back into the classroom to teach, get our kids educated properly. Again, I'm a public school teacher, and I'm just very concerned about what's happening in the education of our kids during the COVID vaccine era.
Oh, I am too, because as we've talked about, the rather decreased educational achievement gap, the increased gap, or the decreased educational performance, which is just very significant, which we've talked about. And I'll go around the round table, but right here in the state of Texas, since we're broadcasting here, there's been a real significant push in the last couple of days to put teachers very close to the front of the line for that very reason.
And I would agree with that. Even though we know that kids can be, especially the young kids, can carry it and they're asymptomatic, so you don't know it. On the other hand, the studies are showing there's just very little spread. One of the reasons why Mayor de Blasio in New York decided to pull back from that is because there's just really very little indication that it's spreading among standard children in K through 12. College is a little different, especially when people go out to parties. But so that's an issue there. But I agree with Pam that teachers should be on the front there.
Let me talk about Kentucky for just a minute, because we did promise we would talk about that. One of the cases you're dealing with right now, Lathan Watts at First Liberty, is that you have the governor in Kentucky who, first of all, wanted to close down the churches. Now he wants to close down the schools, which make no sense. And the schools are not super spreaders. And especially if we get some of these teachers vaccinated, school might be the safest place.
Yeah, I mean, even before he made this order, the CDC, I forget, I think it was the CDC, said that schools were the safest place for kids to be.
Yes.
Because of all
Very true.
the measures that are put in place.
Which is a flip from where they were 4 or 5 months ago, where they thought schools were maybe the one of the worst places.
Dr. Anthony Fauci changed his mind.
Yeah, imagine that, right?
Yeah. Many times, but on many issues.
But there again, I mean, so once we learn things, then we should not just stick to the old way of doing things. Okay, so we put kids back in school, and it didn't become this super spreader event that everybody thought it was going to be. They didn't spread it in any great degree to each other or to the teachers. There hasn't been a massive increase of public school teachers or private school or charter school teachers who got COVID from their students. Okay, so schools are one of the safest places, particularly for kids who are the least likely demographic to get it and have serious complications with it when they do. Our client, Danville Christian Academy, because the governor has basically closed K through 12, is in a county in Kentucky that has not had a single death due to COVID.
Amazing,
not one. Okay, and the public health authorities there had used Danville Christian Academy as a model for how to do school for other schools in the state. Like, look at all the things that they're doing. This is how you should do it. Okay. Yes. So the order basically said K through 12, you can't go to school. College, you still can, where just like you said, it actually has spread because college kids party.
But college kids do what college kids do.
Exactly. So, yeah, his order made no sense from a scientific standpoint, and it certainly made no sense from a constitutional standpoint, because these religious schools have a right to live according to their faith. So we got an injunction against the governor. Sixth Circuit stayed the injunction, so now we're at the Supreme Court asking them to overturn the Sixth Circuit.
And your attorney general there in Kentucky, who I just really like, he's been working with you too.
He is. He's suing the governor right along with us.
Yeah,
so if nothing else, Governor Beshear, it should be an indication of your policy could use improvement when your own attorney general sues you over it.
Well, we're simply out of time, but let me just mention again that the first article there will put you to firstliberty.org, or click on the picture of Lathan Watts. Second article will put you to ipi.org, or you can click on the picture there, Dr. Merrill Matthews, or you can go to the Hill and see all the nice comments people made about this article. But I appreciate you both joining us here today, and especially educating us on a variety of issues ranging from religious liberty to poll watching to vaccines. So it's great to have you both here. Let me just mention, we did talk about Tommy Nelson. He's going to be on with us Monday.
Oh, good.
We're going to be talking about the GAP program, but maybe he'll tell us a little bit about what it's like to get COVID as he actually survived that, and we'll talk about that. And we got all sorts of other great guests next week. Visit our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve. We'll see you back here on Monday on Point of View.
Election day has come and gone, so tell me, do people like you need to be more or less vigilant, more or less informed, more or less involved in making an impact? I think the answer is clear. Those who value freedom of conscience and religious liberty need to do more than ever to stand up for what the founders gave us and put America on track for greatness. Yes, we face challenges, but it's in the hard times that the greatest victories are seized and won. I urge you today, right now, to seize this opportunity and join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Be part of the solution our nation needs. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-3776. 5151. The election is not the end of anything. It's another beginning. And when you join the Truth Team, you make it possible for millions of people to get the real news they desperately need and the practical marching orders that Kerby and the team at Point of View Radio give each day. Join us now in this critical moment. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.